The 20-year-old, look inside. At that time, I was going to save the world through politics. Not to ignore the politics, but pay at least as much attention internally or more than you're casting on the outside. And you don't have to work so hard to be liked and loved. You're okay. Just relax, kid, you know, and allow life to come to you. You don't have to force it. And open your heart. Don't just focus on your clever brain so much. You know, open your heart and see what possibilities reveal themselves to you. And that it's not your fault. The way the world is, and even the way you are, it's not your fault. It's not a fault. Just accept yourself.
There's an American psychologist who had that human beings are all creatures with special needs. And I think one of our special needs is for meaning. Our lives are not meant to be just lived for the daily sake of physical existence. Now, that meaning in a tribal setting is automatically provided for you because you're bigger than yourself and you belong to something greater than yourself. And when you're connected with nature, or you're connected with some spiritual practice or belief, you have some meaning that transcends your daily struggles for survival. Now, this society has pretty much reduced that. Like we talk about meaning a lot, and we talk about broad values such as freedom and democracy and so on, but that's not what people experience in their daily lives. Nobody experiences democracy in their daily lives. Mostly people work in institutions where they're told what to do, and they have no voice on the matter whatsoever. And the freedom is very often reduced to making choices between meaningless alternatives. And there's more and more disconnection, as we've already mentioned. So there's a deep lack of meaning in people's lives. The addictions can certainly come along and provide a false, temporary, but momentarily satisfactory sense of meaning. And meaning is important to all of us. We all want to feel there's something more significant about our lives than simply the fact that we have dinner in the evening and we defecate in the morning. The fundamental dynamic in human life and the most important factor in the development and existence of human beings is attachment, connection to another human being. As infants, we're utterly helpless, and we're more helpless than any other creature, and stay that way longer than any other creature. So without that attachment relationship, we simply don't function, can't live. It's life essential. And throughout life, of course, we evolved as a species of attachment. By attachment meaning, it's a gravitational force that pulls two bodies together, just like love is the common word for attachment, connection, where somebody's taking care of somebody else, somebody's holding somebody else, and somebody's being held. Now, gravitation itself is an attachment force. I'm talking about physical gravitation. It pulls two bodies together. And literally, it's gravitation that makes the world go around the sun, isn't it? So when they say love makes the world go round, it's true in the purest physical sense. Well, it's also true in the psychological realm. And by love here, I don't mean the emotion that a parent feels towards the child, because I take it for granted that all parents love their kids. And even the hard as it is to fathom, but even the parents who abuse their kids love their kids. They just don't know how else to love them because they're acting out their own childhood programming. So by love here, in this case, I don't mean the emotion. I mean the capacity to be present with and understand and see the other human being for exactly who they are, and to accept them for who they are, and to invite them unconditionally to be in your presence exactly the way they are. That's what love actually is. If you get triggered, that's the buzzword these days, that's perfectly all right. But on the other hand, for the person being triggered, you might want to consider what a trigger actually is. So the metaphor comes from what? It comes from weaponry. Whenever you get triggered, somebody pulled that trigger, perhaps, but who's the one carrying the ammunition? Who's the one with the mechanism to deliver the ammunition? Who's the one with the explosive material inside them? And where do you want to put your attention? You want to put your attention on the trigger purely? Or are you curious about what ammunition, what explosive material you're carrying inside? So triggers are really great to work with if you want to get to know yourself. And if you don't want to get to know yourself, then what we usually do is we just resent whoever did the triggering, and that we think they did this to us. How you handle people who trigger you, that's your call. But at least know that you're the one with all the explosive inside you. And you gain so much liberation if you find out what that ammunition is and how you got it, and whether you can really diffuse it. Like you diffuse a bomb, you can actually diffuse that ammunition inside you through getting to know yourself. And that's where freedom actually lies. When nobody has, if nobody had the power to trigger you, not because you were closed down and shut down and isolated, but because you're totally aware of yourself. Well, that's where liberation actually is.
I make the distinction between blame and responsibility. Blame says that you did something that you could have done otherwise, and so therefore you're at fault. That's what blame says. Responsibility says, yes, you did this to yourself, but not consciously or deliberately. You did it because you're programmed to do it by your own childhood experience, which in turn was programmed by your parents' childhood experience. So there's nobody at fault. Everybody does their best. Well, we do pass these unconscious patterns on. And you don't blame people for having unconscious patterns. You try to make them conscious of it so they can take responsibility for it. So there's no responsibility without consciousness. And there's no blame. So I don't blame anybody for their illness. I don't blame their parents either. But I do say these unconscious patterns have been passed on, and these unconscious emotional dynamics have an impact on your physiology. That's all. And if you want to have an impact on your physiology, you got to get conscious. You have to realize what have you been doing unconsciously so you can stop doing it or do it differently. So it's a matter of liberating people from these ingrained patterns for which they're not to be blamed. So in my world, there's no room for blame whatsoever, but there is room for helping people to become responsible, for helping people being response-able, being able to respond to their circumstances. And without awareness, none of us are response-able. The personality itself is a defensive structure that we develop as a way of dealing with our pain. So much of what we consider to be our personality is actually an overlay upon our true selves. The difficulty that we have is that we have trouble understanding people with different formative experiences than ours. And precisely because, if I look at something like addiction, as you could see from the show of hands here, it really is a matter of a spectrum, and we're just about all of us are on the spectrum. But precisely because we're all on the spectrum, and we think we could deal with this in our own life, we say, well, why couldn't they deal with it in their own life? We're full of judgment. Why couldn't they deal with it? If you've never been profoundly depressed, you don't have an idea what it's like to be depressed. You have no idea what it's like to have life be utterly drab and meaningless and threatening, to the point that you might even want to leave life, to the point of trying to kill yourself. Because it is on a spectrum, and we've all felt down sometimes, we've all felt alienated sometimes, but we snapped out of it. And we have no idea what it's like to be deeply into it, where choice no longer exists. And so we have great difficulty understanding people whose brains give them a different experience of life. There's a lot of people out there who see the truth, but they don't control the media, and they don't write the scripts for most movies. So therefore, you might not get validation out there, but you have to believe in your own truth, and you have to deepen your relationship to your truth. And you'll connect with people that are also seeking the same truth as you are, even if they don't see it the way you do. So never be afraid of your own truth, and to explore it. Also, don't be afraid to let go of it if you find that there's a deeper truth that speaks to you. And at the same time, whatever you do out there in the world, do an equal amount of work internally. Because if you don't, your work in the world will not be as effective.